I guess. Oh, the game. Okay.
There we go.
That's so much better. Really appreciate it.
We're back.
All right. Whatever it was, it's been fixed.
North.
Now we get into 2,000 atmospheres for game 1 of the best of 3. In the bottom left representing Ting Mobile as well as the NA region, we have Neeb.
And his opponent, spawning in the northeast as the red Protoss player, representing Dragon Phoenix Gaming, he is Zest.
So there's one thing that actually I think does maybe help Neeb a little bit is that his main opponent in North America will generally use Scarlet in those finals. The semifinals, right, leading up to that, he always has to face Estrella. And so he's getting this practice against a fairly highly skilled Protoss player. Estrella is definitely no joke, but one that also can be kind of aggressive, a little bit odd. I don't think that Zest and Estrella are going to be actually mimics of each other's style, no, not at all. But I do think that Neeb has been forced to get a little more comfortable in this matchup than maybe in the past. He still says, though, that he's not very comfortable in this matchup. He seems sometimes just like, yeah, I don't really understand how it's supposed to go from here. Whereas Zest, I mean, we don't get to hear his thoughts as often, but Zest just apparently is comfortable in any situation. He'll do anything, and he'll respond to anything, whatever way he likes.
Yeah, I think that's one of the more interesting things, especially being the East Coast player, right? Because as good as Estrella is, and I think Estrella is awesome, he definitely has a kind of unique way that he plays the game. And I think as far as other Protoss players that he might be playing against, even on EU, like Showtime, again, kind of has you have an expectation of what you're going to see out of a player like that. Okay, he's like, all right, Showtime's going to want kind of play that sort of come at me style. He's not really cheesing you. You're not worried about as much about getting proxied. Estrella can kind of do that, but if he doesn't, he plays greedy. And then you're like, okay, I'm going against a top Korean Protoss player now. It's going to be a lot more like the standard PvP that you on paper should expect, except really well executed. And it could be anything. It could be just a regular gateway expand. It could be a super aggressive proxy. Those are never off the table in PvP. So I can kind of see where a little bit of that discomfort comes in, right? Not necessarily easy to get practice against Korean Protoss players from the East Coast.
Yeah, I think PvP is still one of the matchups that definitely has a distinction between all of the regions, even though Neeb actually is commonly referred to as a European Protoss, basically. He's always practicing. He plays like them. He does find these 2 Adepts right off the bat, takes down 1, so doesn't even really have to worry if he makes a mistake with the pylon and the probe, although this poor probe not going to get a chance at life. Both of them went into Stargates, which is always kind of a funny thing in PvP. Unbeknownst to each other, they don't know about the Stargate, so they're both going to add on that Oracle. And then it's perhaps a question of, does anyone go, wait a second, what is my opponent doing? And actually add a Phoenix. So Neeb might be picking up that there's a lot of Adepts. Sometimes that does lead into that Stargate opener more so than the Stalkers, because the Adepts are a little cheaper. But of course, it's not like you can't, because Neeb is actually going Stalker opener and is actually going into Stargate, which is about to be found, if not already. The Adept, I think, got close enough to see it, or eventually will. There it is. So now does Zest cancel this Oracle? No, he's just going to go on with it. No, he does cancel it. He's going to grab that Phoenix, and he is going to try and make sure that Neeb does not get to do a lot of damage right off the bat, but more importantly, like consistent damage. And Neeb, well, his Stalkers are there. He knew the possibility was real. So still 4 probes dead for Neeb. He had trouble handling the Adept, but it could have been worse.
At the very least, he did kill all of the Adepts, right? Like, especially those first couple ones that poked through. He's gotten something going, but at the end of it, Zest finds himself with a minor worker advantage. Nothing crazy, as the Oracle will be recalled for Neeb back over to his base, but not able to find those probes to go after. And there's the Stasis Sword as well. So he's considering the possibility that those Stalkers maybe try to make their way back across in case he just drops a shield battery inside of his main and begins to move towards that Blink upgrade. But I do wonder, especially with the considerations that we've made in regards to the latency, etc. Is Neeb going to try to aim for a specific timing attack? Does he feel comfortable playing it out long? I'm a little bit nervous when I think about that, just because we've seen Neeb be the most vulnerable he's been in the last month or so, right? Between the end of that season, where he started to get a lot stronger. He looked very good by the end of it all. But we saw, a couple of uncharacteristic mistakes, and that's what we're keeping our eyes on for. Not trying to draw too much attention to it, but it's something that if those kinds of things end up coming into play, we're going to be like, okay, maybe we need to go back to the drawing board a little bit.
mean, things are looking really like, they're certainly playable. I'm not really concerned about Neeb's position yet. I was honestly concerned that going into game 1, Zest would do something quite aggressive, but maybe do enough damage to put himself in a lead, and then Neeb would just be like constantly already a bit mentally defeated, actually in the game be struggling. That's not really what's happened here. And in fact, Neeb has taken down a lot of the adepts that Zest was building, so it can feel at least like he's taken trades out there. And most importantly, he has significantly faster blink. So that is going to give him a lot more confidence. I don't know if he can really do anything with that blink timing in particular, but a lot more confidence to slap down that third Nexus. If it turns out that Zest is following him, which is what's happening, then Neeb can be like, all right, I got a little bit of a lead. Still got to worry in case there's a bit of a bigger army spike for him than there is for me, because sometimes we do see the player with blink finished move out with a decent number of units, look for the force fields, hope their opponent doesn't have a shield battery. But yeah, Neeb's got much faster blink, faster third Nexus, and now also faster +1. So it actually feels like Zest, there was a lot of potential in the early game with the Adept Oracle combo. He didn't actually do all that much. And the rest of the PvP is kind of Neeb leading the charge, looking like the confident guy, which when we hear him say, like, I'm not really that confident, I think Zest is a really scary opponent, well, his play actually doesn't say that. His play is saying that he's actually in a really fine, headspace.
Yeah, and he's got a nice position. I think you're spot on with that too, especially with the Oracle. When he went over and saw the third Nexus starting, you're like, okay, at least I don't have to worry about getting big pushed. And maybe he wants to try to put some pressure on. But again, it comes down to one of those things where you're talking about the control of Blink Stalkers is a huge factor in PvP, right? If you're going to try and take these fights. So the fact that Neeb is, trying to take that base a little bit faster, maybe being on the more defensive side, I don't mind that at all. Obviously, you can't throw everything out the window just because he got a little bit of lag. So he has to still stick with a good game plan that he trusts and that he believes in. But Zest is giving him quite a bit of respect in that same regard too, right? Like he didn't try to go for some sort of big push onto that third base as Neeb was getting it. He's willing to play ball. He respects that Neeb's, even some of the first big tournaments, right, that put Neeb on the map when we talked about what made him one of the best non-Korean players was kicking a lot of Korean Protoss butt.
Yeah, Neeb was definitely a player, made a name for himself, actually going over to Korea, winning that Casper Cup, and then actually continuing to do really well in a lot of the international cross tournaments. The Koreans absolutely know him, and they definitely respect him. So as much as Zest was kind of helping, give a tiny little trash talk, just for funsies in his interview, I think he really is going to acknowledge that he's got to play this out carefully. I don't think he's going to shy away from doing usual Zest things in an entire best of 3, but this game, it was a little bit of that poking opportunity, a little bit of a test, if you will, like, okay, where you're at, Neeb, how's your micro going to be cross-server, and the rest of it's been this normal PvP that Zest has just actually been lagging behind a little bit on some important things. So there was the blink, now it's a +2, charge is done for Neeb, only started for Zest, and actually Neeb is going to go for a massive amount of gateways. So Zest might actually feel like he is behind. They've been constantly scouting each other or attempting to with hallucinations, and maybe trying to actually get to these disruptors, knowing that they're going to be a bit of a weak point, but finding that the reward, should he get to 2 or 4 disruptors, is going to be far greater. Neeb is going to fall behind on that. If his push that I expect he's going to do here, the Warp Prism is on the way, doesn't do enough damage. But this is one of those pivotal moments. If Neeb pushes out, finds the right concave, finds the disruptors without too juicy of a shot, then his sheer number advantage might actually work out.
Yeah, it's really interesting that Zest has kind of just taken this position with that second robo this early on. The first 2 disruptors are out. He's going into number 3 and 4, and I think at that point it becomes really tough to make this work. So that window you were talking about, Neeb is going to test the waters, see what he can get away with, and 2 disruptors, I think it's it's pretty reasonable to play around that, especially if he gets them to fire their Novas before the additional ones come by. And he's actually going to try to get a backstab with a stasis trap on that mineral line. We'll grab 2 probes of Zest, but like this, I look at this choke point zombie grub and I start to sweat a little bit. This is not the point that you want to try to push when your opponent now up to 4 disruptors you know, those Novas going to be blasting you to smithereens.
Now, Zest knows that he's still in a very delicate spot. We have some stasis traps being put down all around his base and on top of his 4th base, something that he doesn't actually want to give up, even though it might seem like he has to. The Disruptor is going to be able to use this choke, and it's going to be pretty good, even if the rocks were actually broken down. There's 4, almost 6 Disruptors, and here they go. 2 Disruptor shots. Going to find actually not that much as Zest just gets completely overwhelmed.
Oh, what's
a funny little stasis trap actually creates a bit of force field of Zealots that are just locked in, but nonetheless, Zest is just overcome. He doesn't have anything aside from these Disruptors.
Yeah, the shield battery overcharge is doing the best that it can, but Neeb repositioning to get a wider arc. The Stalkers do start to take a little bit of a beating, but I mean, that wave of reinforcements, he's reinforcing himself as the stasis ends, and if the Zealots get onto the Disruptors, well, there isn't a whole lot that he's going to be able to do to save them. The Stalkers are there as well, and Neeb looking incredibly sharp to start things off here. Zombie Grow, I mean, we talk about all the things that you would be worried about in this situation, talking about service, talking about all that jazz, but he is looking good and getting on top of Zest with this very gateway-heavy army, relying a little bit more on the units that he doesn't necessarily have to micro with that pinpoint precision as hard, and it's paid off in a huge way. 2 Disruptors are about to spawn right in front of this army, but I think at the end of all of it, Neeb has a 4th base. His 3rd is fine. He obviously still has a huge amount of army, but Zest he's kind of in that rebuild, reset mode. Both Disruptors get sniped trying to launch those Novas, and Neeb's just going to try to end it right here.
That was a very nice jump on top. Neeb had built up his Blink Stalkers to a point where he could actually take down Disruptors like that while continuing to harass and also macro back at home with +3, 75% done. I mean, no matter how you slice it, Zest is the one who's going to lose this game, whether, well, okay, that's quite the stasis trap.
Noise.
But whether it's right now or in a minute or two, Neeb definitely has the game. And there it is. Zest has to acknowledge it, taps out, and Neeb will take game number 1. Perhaps to many people, not that surprising. We know Neeb could take a map off of Zest, but the way that he did it in this cross-server situation as well, that was very convincing.
Very impressive game. And I have to wonder, Zombie Grub, did Zest respect him a little bit too much in this? He's like, okay, yeah, I'll go toe-to-toe with you in a macro game, but Neeb is a very good macro player. He's not a guy that we say usually relies on trickery. His strength is that, you know, especially like in PvZ, he'll bust out like those crazy adept builds, and he can catch you off guard if you try to play greedy against him. But he is someone that kind of enjoys when you just let him sit back and don't put too much pressure on him. He did a really good job, I think, of just getting himself into that place where, you know, that cross-server situation we were talking about doesn't have as much of an impact. He's mostly microing the Stalkers, but the sheer number of charge lots he had, Zest was not prepared to deal with that much supply in his face.
He really tried to prepare for it, though. Like, he did see it coming. He knew there was going to be just a real quantity problem, but if his quality units could actually shine, then it was still something that he could wiggle his way out of. But even with the stasis traps, even with the shield batteries and the cannons helping here, it still wasn't enough. It did get close. There was a point where there's only about 25 supply difference, and you can see how Zest could have held, but it was always going to be difficult. If Neeb found just good enough of a concave, which is exactly what he found, then it's so difficult to combat that many Zealots.
Those Novas weren't even bad, too. He was getting some pretty juicy shots. It's just that, like you were saying, that the Disruptors were the whole army for Zest at that point, and without anything else to support it, just gets tough. Good use of the charge lots. I think Zest had gotten charged, but
he did.
The economic investment from him went into the double robo and Disruptors, and just wasn't quite able to get to that stable, solid position. And also good target fire early on in that fight on the overcharged battery.
Yes, yeah, making sure to actually cross your T's, dot your I's, do all the things you should do in PvP when you see victory right in front of you. But I also like that you did point out that that is a style that probably is a bit nicer to play on when you're thinking about ping. I think ultimately it is just a good position that Neeb had found himself in, and that was an excellent just like killer instinct, pull the trigger, go for the massive amount of units as well. But it also probably helped that he really didn't have to worry about playing the Disruptor War, because I think if that hadn't worked, if he did just enough damage to play out this kind of okay macro game, then I think Neeb's sweating a little bit more against a guy who already has so many Disruptors and also has that excellent control. But now we get into game 2 on Blackburn. In the bottom left, up 1, he is Ting's Neeb.
Couldn't say it better myself, Zombie Grub, especially when those Disruptor, when you're blinking away from those shots, it gets so close And this man in the bottom right needs to bring things back in the red from Dragon Phoenix Gaming. He is Zest.
All right, so not really wanting to play on any of the new maps. I didn't actually catch what the third map was, but so 2,000, then to Blackburn. 2,000 atmospheres remains a very stable, standard macro map of the old as well, so it's very comfy for players. Blackburn, especially for PvP, I don't think I'd ever use the word comfortable for this map. The low ground situation in PvP and then all of the mind games that go into it is always going to be a confusing start. And this is where Neeb actually had taken a couple of really nasty losses or way more overly complicated PvP victories in that North American group stage. Blackburn actually felt like it was tripping up Neeb. He was almost overthinking situations a lot on this map.
It is interesting that you only... I think over the years we've had a kind of weird amount of these maps where you have like this just open area in front of the natural, which you play completely differently from a map that gives you the ramp up. Just from a safety perspective, denying a vision from units trying to attack on the outside. And we see it here in the PvP like you were saying. Everything ends up getting built on the low ground. But that doesn't always mean that you have to go for the fast expansion either. Because the reason why people weren't doing this all the time before is exactly that. You're worried about getting counterattacked. Or sometimes when you see your opponent build that low ground gateway, even if you're doing it yourself, you're like, actually, I could probably just, one base this and have a wall off at the front where they can't get in. That the Stargate gets booted up for both players. They have the pylon blocks, but it's so important to try to have that probe around and delay this base, but you need to also try to be aware of what the follow-up's going to be. And Zest going for the cybernetics core block on top of it, saying, Neeb, why don't you just one base all in me, bro?
Yeah.
Just do it.
That's always such a, again, weird mental game that you can play. Like at some point, Zest is going to have to say, well, you're not clearing this up that fast, so what is your alternative plan now that I've gotten it down? And sometimes there is no alternative plan. Sometimes the Protoss who gets blocked this long just kind of grits their teeth and go, okay, whatever, man, fine, you got this, but I'll come back later at a different point.
What if he builds another pylon?
That would be amazing.
Yeah,
but
we have to get that audio clip from Pig calling our boy Tiefel a psychopath.
Yeah. But the other interesting thing is always the Stargate. What do they open up with the Stargate? There's been a weird kind of turn of events amongst, I think, the pro discussion about how that Stargate versus Stargate can work out, where weirdly enough, the Oracle seems so counterable by Phoenix, and it seems so scoutable as well, because you can see what's coming out of the Stargate. But then, because the Oracle is such a massive threat, we do still see people actually try and go for the Oracle. Then there's also the additional kind of Void Ray rush across the map that, Max Packs really like, so usually he brings over shield batteries. And then if everything has been done, everything's been tired out, and it ends up being Phoenix, then we get into good old-fashioned Phoenix Wars.
Oh boy.
And
yeah.
Neeb is doubling down on this. Last time I saw him double down on the Phoenix Wars, he did get into a very good position against the other Protoss, because the Protoss it was facing tried to transition into Blink Stalkers, but then he proceeded to not do anything with the Phoenix, and I think that game might actually be like on the forefront of his mind here. He's got to be very careful to understand what Zest is going for, and then actually use this significant Phoenix number advantage to actually do a lot of damage.
Yeah, I think this is a really, really, really good choice from Neeb. And like you were saying, when you get into Phoenix and PvP, that's like the shadow realm of PvP, Phoenix versus Phoenix. If you go across the map and you get caught at all, obviously they shoot while moving and they have the same speed as the other Phoenix. If your opponent has more than you, you're super dead. You just instantly lose the game. So Zest just now starts his second Stargate, but Neeb, he's going to be able to build up that number advantage just a little bit faster. The economy's not quite there at the same pace, but as he comes out, he has that additional one. He does lose the first Phoenix, however, so that the shots end up coming out in such a way that it still, I guess it's a soft reset, huh?
Well, I think it's really difficult for them, right? Because if it happens abruptly, one, that's very difficult to count a Phoenix flower. You're like,
that's true.
Is it 8 or is it 20? I don't know. And then two is like, does he have reinforcing Phoenix of 2 seconds behind or 1 second behind? A significant difference, right? When you talk about the snowball effect. And also three, does he have a second Stargate when I don't? And that would have been the case if Zest had been like, all right, time to shine. Unless he won in a drastic manner, he might have actually over-invested and actually been pushed back by the growing number from Neeb. So it's such a funny little game, isn't it, Phoenix versus Phoenix? I kind of get excited because it is at least unique, right? But on the face of it, Phoenix versus Phoenix is a bit dumb. It's a bit silly. It really does force you to play a very different type of game outside of just the matchups between the races and the players. It's just, this is so unique.
Yeah, because if you try to switch off of the Phoenix, then the opponent has more than you by a huge amount. They just run and kill all of your Phoenix, and then you can never leave your base, right? They'll just be going around, picking up all your probes. When you have 12 or 13 Phoenix, you're not exactly worried about flying over a cannon to kill a whole mineral line in 2 seconds. So I mean, it's an arms race. The Fleet Bacon is coming in for Zest a little bit earlier than Neeb, and that means we'll be having the Anion Pulse Crystals for the Phoenix range. And if you get, I mean, that's like the kind of upgrade that allows you to decisively win that trade sometimes, depending on the way that you're microing it. But I'm just going to say it, Zombie Grub. I don't really care if it bothers anybody, but Zest is going to be the one, I think, in this game, if we went to NA for this one, right?
I'm actually not sure. I couldn't track them fast enough.
Okay.
I would assume, but I don't know.
Await future confirmation of that. But I think, especially with units like this, that's one of those terrifying things you have to consider. I'm sure Roddy's sitting back in the green room right now like, oh, man, here we go. And this is our resident Phoenix expert is tragically not patched directly into my ear. I can psionically connect with him, but it's not through words.
Yeah. He's actually already complained this week about how, like, just even the slightest ping can really mess up that micro, but especially when it comes to Phoenix. Now, because they're both getting Anion Pulse Crystals so close together, it's not really worth discussing what could have happened. But one of the things that could have happened for Neeb is that if he had at least gotten into range, you don't get out of range. But again, like, we don't have to discuss that. We're moving on already. They both have Anion Pulse Crystals, and actually Neeb is going into a carrier very quickly. You have to be careful about this. That's a big investment. It takes a long time. Like, no one has any upgrades. It's funny, actually.
I guess if the interceptors are able to mess with the AI at all, it can really help Neeb snowball a fight quickly. But with Zest getting his own 3rd Stargate and now going into carriers too, I guess it's the Golden Armada rush versus the Golden Armada rush?
Yeah. Like, if Neeb had invested and Zest hadn't, then Zest might have had one little power spike with a number of Phoenix correctly target firing does maybe overwhelm. But when you also consider that, it's not like your opponent doesn't have any Phoenix at all, you're dealing with shield battery overcharge still. Like, the next step of this is, kind of stalemating and then going into the actual mass late game with all the capital ships. And then I really love the capital ship PvP because it's a bit of a game of rock, paper, scissors with how Carrier, Tempest, Void Ray works, which I'll get into when we actually see some differences. But right now it is just about the carriers for both of them. Actually, Neeb goes back into Phoenix.
So I really think his plan is to just try and focus on target firing with his Phoenix and having the carriers as a distraction. The +1 does get started up for Zest. He sees the carriers as this pylon gets destroyed, but he's not going to have that upgrade in time for this fight. And the Sentry is perhaps the most important piece of this puzzle, a Guardian Shield to mess with the double shot of those Phoenix, and of course the Interceptors could have a huge impact. So he pops it, but with the batteries right there, maybe he's feeling a little hesitant towards forcing the fight.
I just brought this up. I was surprised that Neeb was doing what he was doing. That would have been... If he had won, too, I would have been so impressed, because to even practice the situation is so rare. And you can't just tell someone to do it because it's not really genuine practice. So, yeah, I like the pullback. I do. I think that would have been an overcommittal over shield batteries, over who knows what else is popping in reinforcements for Zest faster than Neeb. But, again, stalemating out, like, I'm sure.
Can we see the units tab? What ended up with the Phoenix count when Neeb went back in? So he's just got a minor lead in the Phoenix count, but a couple of extra carriers can go a long way for Zest, especially with him going for the +1 a little bit earlier. I still never was quite sure how much Neeb was willing to invest towards that himself, but comes over, he's going to grab some of the probes mining the gold resources. I think the gas is the big factor right now when you're trying to build these types of armies. But with that Phoenix count lead, being able to force a fight here could end up turning really nicely for him. That +1 is so close for Zest, but not quite ready yet.
That would have been a very fun fight to watch. Basically, the increased number of Phoenix for Neeb probably would not overcome the effect of +1 air on the slightly lower number of Phoenix from Zest. But
it's 14-8 though. But yeah, now I think the +1 would have obliterated him if he had taken that fight 10 seconds later. And it could still be quite dangerous to force it here. Baiting out a few interceptors is nice. Take some money. Steal a few pennies from your opponent.
Yeah, absolutely. Finally, we have Neeb going for an upgrade as well. I may even see some shield upgrades up. The devil, we have a shield upgrade on the way for Neeb. It is just going to get down to, eventually everyone's going to have maxed out capital ships. So mass carrier seems to be the most, not to discredit it, but a bit, more of the aim move situation. You do have to focus fire carriers instead of letting the interceptors just kill each other, I suppose. But then you can eventually get into the Tempest game, and the Tempest outrange the carriers quite a bit. But if the Tempest ever get in range, then Tempest are very fragile units. Then we have some people try to add in Void Rays with Flux Veins, which then get really good at just pouncing on a capital ship army, and they do obliterate those armies very quickly with their prismatic alignment. So it can be, I feel like it's still an emerging, developing situation, because again, it's so not practiced. But both of them sticking to the carriers for the next 40 supply by the looks of things, and it was Neeb who started. Oh, she finished. There you go. Gave some other ship first.
All right. Well, and that +2 is still going to be a little bit ahead for Zest. He's got a lead in that carrier count. But one of the things, I guess, for Neeb in terms of the way that this one's gone is with that Phoenix count advantage that we were discussing earlier, they're mostly off the table for Zest. So still having a lot of Phoenix gives you a lot of power against the carriers. As they're going to do a ton of damage to the interceptors, and the mothership obfuscates any type of control or micro that you're going to try to do. It also gives you an opportunity to use that new emote I know they added with the -400 400 for those of you subbed in the chat.
Actually, were some pretty fun emotes, to be honest.
I really like the cursed Pog worker emotes. They terrify me. I'm gonna have nightmares about those.
Yeah. Even when they both get maxed out, guys, it's still going to be really difficult to actually see an engagement, because while maybe they'll find their opponent on an upgrade deficit and they'll say, okay, that's the time to pull the trigger, fair enough. Again, counting on a predictable outcome in such a rare, unpredictable matchup of mass air versus mass air directly to it as well, it's going to be difficult for both players. I don't think either one is really truly confident. They might just say, okay, I'm maxed out, I get upgrades, I think I'll go for it, and I got to make sure that I'm 100% when I'm 100%. But overall, I'm not really certain that there's they're both looking at it and saying, oh, if I get to this point, then I will definitely win, because it's been such an even game, and just capital ships, all those interceptors flying around can make these battles look really weird and last a really long time.
Yeah, I'm still a big fan of Neeb's setup, but the carrier count for Zest is getting terrifying, and his focus on the upgrades a little bit earlier, especially just having that +3 attack so much faster than Neeb is going to make a carrier versus carrier engagement brutal. He trades out a lot of the Phoenix because he's going to go Giga Carrier at the same time.
Giga Carrier, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is potentially that perfect timing. Gonna have +3 so far ahead of Neeb, but if he clicks on it and realizes it, then that's absolutely the time to go. And there's no other complication here. Neeb doesn't have a different composition that might throw a wrench into things. It would really just be about the upgrades.
Yeah, I guess the armor upgrades that Zest hasn't gotten at all kind of does mitigate that a little bit. Wow, they're both attacking the rocks. Okay, so time warp on the carriers, time warp on the other carriers. Mothership is dead. There is a photon cannon contributing to this, and perhaps the least castable battle of StarCraft 2 that we've had at the EPT in front of us, as we watch a giant swarm of locusts attempt to rip apart the shell hosts of another swarm, and Neeb is taking this fight decisively. Whatever it was tipping the scales, he's gotten it done. Neeb beats